Hello and welcome to a journey into a world shaped by hooves iron and endless sky. Imagine a land with no walls to protect it, no forests thick enough to hide, in no cities to slow the wind. A land where winter cuts like a blade and summer burns like a furnace. A land so open, so exposed that by all logic no army should be able to rise from it, much less conquer half of the world. And yet from this quiet expanse of grass and silence, a force emerged that rewrote the map of continents. This is the story of a Mongol horse warrior under Genghis Khan, of the life he lived, the customs that shaped him, the tactics that made him part of the most extraordinary military engine of the medieval age. How did a boy raised among herds become a soldier, feared from Korea to the Caspian Sea? How did a people without stone buildings break kingdoms that believed themselves eternal? How did discipline, mobility, and memory turn nomads into the architects of a new world? In this tale, we will explore the forging of warriors, the laws that bound them, the brilliance of their commanders, the harshness of their homelands, and the quiet moments that history rarely records. But before we begin riding with them across the steppe, let us first let the mind settle. Breathe in the scent of cold grass. Hear the leather creak beneath the saddle. Feel the morning frost on your fingertips. Now, step back through the centuries into the whispering dawn of the great steppe, where the wind is older than empires and a warrior's life begins with the sound of a horse's breath. The child of the steppe. A life on the steppe begins with a simple truth. Survival is learned early. Mongol children grew up not in houses but in motion, wrapped in furs, carried in saddlebags, placed on horseback long before they could walk with confidence. The land demanded it, the wind demanded it, the herds demanded it, born into the saddle. A declarative truth frames this chapter. To be Mongol was to belong first to the horse and only then to the tribe. The stakes were set by the land itself. Winters froze rivers into steel. Wolves prowled the edges of the grazing grounds. Feuds between clans could spark without warning. Human beings survived only through speed, cohesion, and vigilance. So the children learned not from books but from movement. A father taught his son to grip a pony's mane and balance by instinct. A mother taught him how to cut sinew, soften hide, and mend tack. Older siblings taught him how to read storms by the color of the clouds. By 5 years old, he could ride beside the herds. By 8, he could loose an arrow at full gallop. By 12, he could track a horse thief's trail across a moonlit plain. And in every lesson was a cultural idea. The world is wide, and no place will protect you except your own readiness. It was an idea that shaped an army long before that army had a name. The tent that held a people together. In a nomad's life, the around felt dwelling was more than shelter. It was the memory of ancestors, the center of a moving world. Inside, the child learned the meaning of order. Certain spaces were sacred, certain objects could not be touched. One sat, ate, or entered according to rank and custom. Here the philosophical rhythm emerged. In a life carried by horses, the home was the one place that stood still. This balance between motion and stillness would later define Mongol command. Every campaign, every march, every siege was built from the discipline first learned in the tent, the law that shaped the warrior. As the boy approached adulthood, the stakes sharpened. Clans raided one another, herds shifted with the seasons, famine followed drought, and dangers lay in every direction. Strength alone was not enough. For a warrior to matter, he needed a rule greater than the tribe. The rise of a new order. When Temujin, later known as Genghis Khan, began uniting the clans, he imposed an idea both simple and revolutionary. Loyalty is not to the clan but to the Khan. Discipline belongs not to the warrior but to the army. Law protects not the powerful but the whole. This was the Yasa, the Great Code. It forbade theft of livestock, a lifeline on the steppe. It punished deceit between allies. It rewarded bravery, obedience, and honesty. It elevated merit over lineage, skill over birth. For a young warrior, this changed everything. A man born to a poor family could rise if he rode well, fought well, and commanded wisely. No other medieval empire offered such opportunity, and this meritocratic engine became the backbone of Mongol military brilliance. Training in the circle. Once recruited, the youth entered a rigorous discipline. He practiced the Mangadai feigned retreat. He learned to fire arrows forward sideways and backward crouched low in the saddle. He memorized signals blown on bone horns and flags raised against the sun. He studied how to carry rations of dried meat, fermented mare's milk and hard cheese for long rides. He learned the circle hunt where warriors moved in great arcs, tightening the ring until prey or enemies had no escape. The technical innovation lay not in a single tactic, but in a system, mobility as strategy. Communication across vast distances, coordination between dozens of tumens, absolute obedience to orders. The Mongols fought with the wind and became as swift, silent, and unstoppable as the storms crossing their homeland. The oath of brotherhood. Every Mongol warrior carried more than weapons. He carried a bond, a solemn personal tie that shaped the heart of the army. The sacred handshake. A man swore and a brotherhood with another. This was not friendship. It was a spiritual pact. Two lives joined, two fates intertwined. If one died, the other protected his family. If one rose, the other rose with him. If one betrayed the bond, he was no longer Mongol. This oath created a human network stronger than bloodlines. And it shaped the boy's inner world with a quiet truth: to ride far, one must never ride alone. A warrior's first campaign. Before joining a major expedition, the young warrior hunted wolves with older riders. This was no simple test of aim. It was a test of fear, resilience, and restraint. Wolves fought with cunning breaking formation, circling mounts, darting in to hamstring a horse. The boy learned to read motion as language. He learned to protect his mount before protecting himself. He learned that survival came from unity, not bravery alone. Later, when facing armored knights or fortified cities, this lesson would return. The steppe warrior succeeds because he understands the movement of the whole field, not just the strike of his own hand. Night on the great steppe. As part I draws to its close, the narrative softens. Imagine him now, the young warrior standing beside his mare. The stars spread above him like ice scattered across black stone. The fire burns low, the wind moves through the grass in long waves. He has not yet fought in the great wars. He has not seen the Silk Road cities or the walls of Zhongdu. He has not felt the thunder of thousands of hooves beneath his command. But everything he will become is already present. The discipline, the silence, the instinct to ride where the world opens widest, and the knowledge that his life belongs to something larger than himself. This is the beginning, the first breath of a saga that will carry him across deserts, mountains, kingdoms, and empires. The saddle waits. The night deepens. And far on the horizon, a summons is coming. When the Khan calls, the steppe answers. The night had barely thinned when the summons arrived. A rider approached through the frost-lit grass, his silhouette blurred by drifting mist, his horse steaming with the effort of a long, uninterrupted journey. He did not shout, he did not dismount. He simply raised a hand, the gesture every Mongol recognized, a call to assemble. The warrior tightened the girth of his mare, slipped his bowcase across his back, and rode toward the horizon, where a pale fire began to stir in the east. The world was changing, and he was being drawn into its widening circle. The gathering of the banners, a declarative truth, guides this moment. Mongol armies did not mobilize. Slowly they materialized. Within a day, riders converged from distant valleys. Within 2 herds were rounded supplies, measured families, shifted camps to safer ground. Within 3 tens of thousands of hooves had carved new paths across the plain. The line of white horses. The stakes were immense, for when banners rose on the steppe, it meant either unification or destruction. At the center of the encampment stood 9 white horses, their coats glimmering like frost beneath the rising sun. These sacred animals were chosen for ceremony, a reminder that the coming campaign was not merely a human decision, but one believed to be favored by the eternal blue sky. Around them, the air thrummed with low voices, crackling fires, and the shifting weight of warriors preparing for departure. The Khan's silent command. There was no grand speech. Genghis Khan rarely needed one. He rode along the assembled ranks, his presence more commanding than any proclamation. He looked at men one by one, studying faces, studying horses, marking discipline, resolve, or hesitation. Here lay the cultural and political innovation, a ruler who inspected not from a throne, but from the saddle, sharing the same cold mornings and the same hard ground as his soldiers. This built an army not of servants, but of partners in conquest. A new assignment. When the Khan turned his gaze upon the young warrior, he nodded a silent recognition, neither praise nor burden, but an invitation into the deeper machinery of the empire. The warrior was assigned to a Mingun, a unit of 1,000 under the command of an officer whose lineage traced back to one of Temujin's earliest supporters. This was no small placement. Commanders were chosen for precision, not birth, and each man had proven himself in battles against rival tribes long before the empire began expanding outward. The young warrior felt the weight of this new responsibility settle across his shoulders like a cloak of iron, the army that moved like breath. As the encampment broke apart and the columns formed, the true genius of the Mongol military revealed itself. The fourfold march, a framing statement, sets the rhythm. No medieval army could move as fast or as fluidly as the Mongols. They marched in 4 layers, scouts 10 miles ahead, reading the land as though it were a living script. Heavier units carrying reserve mounts and essential supplies. Rearguards calm and watchful. Each soldier carried multiple horses, switching mounts to preserve stamina. Each unit moved with the precision of a loom, threads weaving, joining, separating, then weaving again. Meals that fit in a saddlebag food was simple, compact, and astonishingly efficient. Dried meat, air-cured curds, strips of fat wrapped in hide, flasks of fermented mare's milk, a handful of millet to heat over a small concealed fire. This allowed the army to travel weeks without resupply, a logistical advantage unmatched in the medieval world, the art of the arrow in motion. Every mile of travel was also preparation. Warriors loosed arrows at roc's bones or distant shrubs while galloping. They practiced the Parthian shot, twisting backward in the saddle, firing while retreating. They learned to lean so low that the mare's flank shielded them from incoming fire. Here was the innovation the horse and the rider trained until they moved as one body, one mind, one instinctive reaction. Such unity blurred the line between human and animal, turning both into an instrument of war. Lessons in silence. Conversation during marches was minimal. Words wasted breath, and breath was needed for the cold air that cut the throat like splinters. In this quiet, the warrior reflected on the horizon ahead. Rumors whispered that the enemies were great cities with walls so thick even thunder could not break them, kingdoms with armies armored in plates heavier than anything seen on the steppe. And yet the Mongols did not fear stone or steel, they feared only disorder. This calm acceptance, rooted in the harsh discipline of the steppe, shaped the philosophical core of their army. Strength was not in the weapon, but in the unity of those who wielded it. Councils under the open sky. One evening, as the wind softened and the sky bruised into shades of violet, the commanders convened a meeting, the circle of strategy. There was no tent, no carved table, no map inked on parchment. The land itself was the map. Logs were set on the ground to mark rivers. Stones stood for fortresses. Horsehair cords traced the routes across distant plains. The commander of the young warriors' unit pointed to a line of pebbles that represented the enemy's frontier. "We strike here," he said, "then vanish." This was the cornerstone of Mongol warfare: hit swiftly, scatter before counterattack, and pull the enemy into unfamiliar ground. the intelligence network scouts returned, with reports gathered from prisoners, merchants, and travelers. Mongol tactics were shaped not just by speed, but by information, a concept few medieval armies truly mastered. The warrior listened intently, realizing how every detail, even the shape of a valley or the habits of a local trader, could alter an entire campaign. Orders given in quiet voices. Commands were passed down in murmurs, not shouts. Each rider received instructions that could guide him through days of movement without confusion. Even in planning, the army moved like wind, soft, steady, relentless. A slow, reflective thought followed. To conquer the world, one must first understand how the world breathes. The night before bloodshed. The column descended into a valley, the grass heavy with dew, the silence broken only by the low whicker of horses settling for rest. The young warrior tended to his mare, brushing her coat, checking her hooves, speaking to her in a voice reserved only for her. In the dim glow of the fire, her eyes reflected the same quiet resolve that filled his chest. An oath renewed. Beside him, his ander sat sharpening a blade, slow, patient strokes across whetstone. No words passed between them. None were needed. The bond between them was older than this campaign, older than the banners that fluttered above. It anchored the warrior in the vastness of what lay ahead. Stars like watching spirits. He lay on his cloak, staring at the constellations that guided nomads long before the empire existed. In the patterns of light, he imagined ancestors riding across the heavens, warriors whose courage had shaped the present moment. Perhaps they watched now, he thought. Perhaps they measured him by the steadiness of his heart. The philosophical whisper settled like dust. History remembers the great Khans, but the world is built by those who ride beneath their commands. He closed his eyes, feeling the earth vibrate faintly with the shifting of horses as the army prepared for dawn. Tomorrow would bring the first clash, the first true test, and the wind that carried warriors across continents had already begun to rise. The first clash of iron and wind. The first light of morning arrived quietly, as it always did, on the steppe, not as a burst, but as a slow dissolving of darkness. By the time the sun touched the grass with pale fire, the army was already mounted. Horses shifted restlessly, sensing tension more keenly than their riders. The air carried a metallic stillness like breath held by the world itself. The young warrior tightened the strap of his quiver, checked the curve of his bow, and exchanged a single glance with his ander. It was enough. Today would mark the beginning of their true service to the Khan. Ahead, the scouts waited like silhouettes etched into the horizon. Somewhere beyond those low hills, an enemy caravan moved, unaware that a storm shaped by discipline and silence was about to descend upon it. The horizon breaks, a framing. Truth sets the stage. The Mongols fought by deciding the terms of every battle before the enemy knew it had begun. The first signal. A horn sounded soft, brief, almost gentle, but every warrior heard it as clearly as a strike of thunder. The column parted and reformed. Scouts galloped ahead, disappearing like sparks cast into wind. Light cavalry followed in a widening crescent. The young warrior rode in the third wave, gripping the reins with steady hands. His mare sensed the shift and pressed forward with eager strength. The sudden descent. In a few minutes, they crested the final ridge. Below them, a caravan wound across the valley floor, merchants under the banner of a distant kingdom guarded by a handful of armored riders. Their pace was steady, unhurried. They believed themselves safe. They did not see the Mongol crescent closing around them. The trap of air and motion. The commanders gave no dramatic order. A flick of a wrist, a raised bow, a shift in formation that was enough. The crescent tightened. Dust rose in thin spirals. Then the Mongols dissolved into motion. The young warrior felt the familiar surge, the joining of man, horse, and wind. Every lesson of childhood balance, breath control, precision awakened in perfect synchrony. He drew his first arrow. The song of the bow, another declarative statement, sets our rhythm. No weapon of the medieval world combined speed, range, and penetrative power like the Mongol composite bow. The arrow that chose its path. He loosened the arrow at full gallop. Its flight was a low whistle, a promise carried on tension and air. It struck one of the caravan guards beneath the arm, a gap in armor that only a trained eye would notice at such speed. The guard fell, not yet understanding what had killed him. A storm without thunder. The Mongols did not shout. Their silence made the attack more terrifying. Arrows fell in rhythms, waves timed by instinct, not command. First volley directed at guards, second volley aimed at fleeing horses, third volley at wheels drivers, anyone who sought to rally. The young warrior felt no triumph, only the calm demanded by necessity. Each target was a decision, not an emotion. The enemy's collapse panic rippled through the caravan. Some tried to form a defensive circle, others attempted to flee, but they moved too slowly, too rigidly, too predictably. The Mongols moved as if guided by a single breath. A philosophical note entered the moment. In war, chaos belongs to the unprepared. Clarity belongs to those who train for it every day of their lives. The circle that leaves no escape. The Mongols formed a tightening ring around the surviving guards. The noose of motion. This tactic, learned from the great steppe hunts, required absolute coordination. Each rider kept the same distance, the same speed, the same angle of pressure. If one broke formation, the entire circle could collapse, jeopardizing all. But the circle held. Guards trapped within tried charging outward. They met only arrows. Others clustered inward, forming a knot of desperation. Still the circle tightened. The warriors calm. The young warrior fired another arrow, this time from the side of his saddle, leaning low so his mare shielded most of his body. He felt the string vibrate against his glove. He felt the arrow's release echo through his chest. One more guard fell. The remaining defenders dropped their weapons. Surrender was their only remaining language. The decision of commanders' captives were taken, valuables collected, records examined. But the most important gain was invisible information. Which kingdom had sent this caravan? What alliances did it rely on? How many soldiers guarded its frontier? How did they respond to threats? For the Mongols, intelligence was as valuable as gold, the weight of mercy and necessity. Even victory carried its own burdens. Prisoners on the steppe. Some of the surrendered guards were conscripted, a practice common in Mongol campaigns. Men who rode well, spoke useful languages, or had skills in siegecraft could earn a place in the expanding ranks. Others were questioned, offered protection in exchange for knowledge, or dispersed into the households of loyal families. The caravan drivers, frightened but unharmed, were given water and allowed to depart once their goods were catalogued. This was another innovation, mercy where it served the empire, strictness where it served order. A somber reflection. The young warrior sat beside his mare, watching the sun sink behind low hills. The valley smelled of dust and iron. His hands trembled faintly, not from fear, but from the weight of what he had done. His ander approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Your arrows flew true." "It does not feel like glory," the warrior replied. "It should not," the ander said softly. "If it felt easy, we would not remain human." The quiet reflection lingered. Conquest builds empires, but conscience shapes men. The Council of Ashes. As evening deepened, commanders gathered to interpret the day's victory. Maps drawn in firelight. The ground once again became a map. Sticks traced caravan routes, rocks marked cities, lines of ash showed the direction of future campaigns. The day's captured documents held surprising detail about the kingdom ahead, its garrisons, its trade hubs, its vulnerabilities. The Mongol commanders studied everything, even the quality of the ink, noting that only a prosperous nation could afford such dye. Knowledge became a weapon, sharper than steel. Orders for the next dawn. The plan was clear. Split into 3 columns, advance simultaneously, force confusion, break defenses before defenses could be organized. The young warrior listened with steady breath. He felt himself becoming part of the vast machine, a single piece, yes, but a piece essential to the whole. This night whispers. Across the grass. The camp settled, fires dimming to embers. Horses lowered their heads, grazing quietly. The wind carried the scent of crushed sage and cooling metal. The young warrior lay beside his mare once more, but tonight he understood something new. He had crossed a boundary invisible to the eye, the threshold between training and blood readiness and reality. Tomorrow would carry him deeper, into cities he had never imagined, across rivers guarded by kings, into battles where the outcome was not as swift, not as certain. But he did not fear the path ahead, because he had learned today that the Mongol warrior did not stand alone. He stood inside a living force, one shaped by wind, bound by law, guided by the Khan, and carried by the thunder of 10,000 hooves. And so he slept with the calm of someone who understood his place in a world already in motion. The road of dust and thunder. The young warrior woke before dawn as the ground still held the night's cold. His breath left pale streams in the air. His mare stood nearby already, alert ears, flicking toward distant sounds only she could hear. The camp stirred in near silence, the faint thud of hooves, the quiet clatter of buckles, the soft murmur of riders preparing themselves. No one waited for the sun to give permission. Movement was the rhythm of life, and the Mongol army rose each morning like a tide. Today the tide would split. 3 columns, 3 directions, one purpose. The warrior strapped on his quiver gripped the leather rein and mounted in a single fluid motion. His anda joined him, the two falling into place within the broad formation, shifting across the valley. Ahead, the land widened, dry plains rolling toward a horizon painted in faint amber. Beyond it lay kingdoms that believed walls could stop the sky. They would learn differently. The division of the host. A framing. Truth centers this chapter. The strength of the Mongol army did not lie in numbers alone, but in the discipline of its fragmentation. 3 paths. 1. Will the commanders rode to the front and raised banners that rippled in the early wind, red for the central force, black for the right wing, blue for the left. The warriors' unit belonged to the right wing, destined to cut a narrow corridor along river valleys where scouts had seen fortifications. Each wing moved independently, yet thought with the same mind trained from years of coordinated hunts, years of riding as one great organism. The farewell between columns. Though the separation lasted only days, each departure carried weight. Brothers in arms embraced in the saddle. Old rivals exchanged brief nods of respect. Messengers rode through the lines, delivering last-minute instructions. The young warrior clasped forearms with men he had trained beside since childhood. None spoke of danger, acknowledging it would break the quiet balance that kept fear at bay. He watched the central column peel away like a dark river riders stretching into the distance. The left wing curved toward the foothills, dust trailing behind them. Then the right wing, his wing turned east. The world opened. The ride begins. They rode at a pace that would have exhausted other armies, but to a steppe warrior the movement felt natural, even comforting. Across dunes, through tall grass, over dry creek beds. The hooves of thousands struck the ground in a slow, thunderous heartbeat. The land as teacher. The steppe changed as they advanced, a subtle transformation only those raised in the saddle could read. Signs in the earth, patches of grass grew shorter, then ceased altogether. The soil shifted from dark loam to powdered sand. Scattered bones of wild horses hinted at earlier migrations. The commander slowed the pace. Horses strained in the thinner grass. Rationing would soon begin. The warrior scanned the horizon with narrowed eyes. Every undulation of land, every abrupt outcropping was a possible threat or opportunity. This was the foundation of Mongol strategic thinking. The land itself was the first and greatest teacher. Wells and watchposts. They reached a shallow depression where a trickle of water glimmered. It was one of the hidden wells, known only to nomads, impossible to find. without generations of memory. The unit halted. While horses drank, scouts inspected nearby ridges for signs of travelers. They found the remains of an outpost, a burned wooden frame, old ashes arrowheads of a foreign pattern. It meant others had passed recently, not merchants, not nomads, soldiers. This discovery shifted the stakes. The kingdom ahead was already watching the frontier. Strategic reflection. The commander knelt beside the ashes and traced a line in the dirt with his knife. "We adjust course," he said. "No direct approach. We become the wind." The warrior understood. To meet an enemy on their terms was folly. To approach from the angle they ignored, that was wisdom. The fortress without a name. By midday, the land sharpened into harsh outcrops, rocky ridges and narrow valleys carved by ancient rivers. The first glimpse, the scouts returned with news. A small fortress clung to a hilltop ahead, a border post, likely garrisoned, likely wary. It was neither large nor luxurious, but it represented something important, the first true obstacle of stone. The Mongols halted in a ravine hidden from the fortress walls. The young warrior felt the shift in mood. Steppe battles were fluid. Fortresses turned war into something slower, heavier, more grinding. But the Mongols did not fear stone. They studied it, the commander's assessment. From behind a rocky spur, the officers observed the structure. Walls of sun-hardened brick, a wooden tower at the eastern gate, a modest garrison, a signal fire platform. "It will not hold long," one officer murmured. "It does not need to hold," the commander replied. "It only needs to delay us long enough for messengers to warn the city beyond." That was the real danger, not the walls, but the alarm they could send. A plan without waste. The strategy formed quickly. Block the signal fire, cut the supply route, draw the garrison out of the gate, end the fight before a torch could touch oil. The warrior's pulse steadied. This would not be a clash of armies, but a test of speed, precision, and silence. The quiet approach. As evening fell, the right wing scattered across the terrain like shadow given form. The descent into darkness. Small groups crept up dry creek beds using the earth itself as cover. Others circled far behind the fortress, positioning themselves between its gates and the nearest village road. The young warrior's task was the signal tower. He and his ander crawled up a slope of crumbling rock lying flat just below the ridge line. From here they could see the tower, clearly a wooden platform stacked with fuel. One torch would send a column of bright smoke into the sky, visible for miles. This tower must remain dark, nerves and stillness. The warrior drew an arrow and rested it across his bow. His breathing became shallow-paced to the tension in his arms. The world narrowed to the flicker of a torch held by a sentry atop the platform. Any mistake, a loose stone, a glint of metal, would ruin the operation. The philosophical whisper returned. Victory belongs to those who master their heartbeat before mastering the field. The gate that opened. Too slowly. Just before moonrise, the Mongols triggered the trap. The feigned retreat. A small squad of Mongols rode into view, loosing a few arrows before fleeing down the valley. From the fortress walls came shouts. Garrison soldiers scrambled to respond. The gate creaked open, not wide, but enough for a patrol to charge out in pursuit. That was the moment. Two larger Mongol groups swept in from opposite directions, clamping the patrol between them. The defenders panicked, retreating toward their gate. Too late. The break. The main Mongol force surged forward, striking the half-open gate with overwhelming speed. The wooden beams cracked. Guards stumbled under the sudden weight of impact. The fortress, unprepared for such rapid escalation, began to fracture. Meanwhile, atop the ridge, the young warrior kept his arrow trained on the sentry. The moment the man lifted the torch toward the fuel stack, he loosed. The arrow struck the sentry's shoulder, spinning him sideways. The torch fell harmlessly to the dirt. Before the man could rise, the ander's second arrow found its mark. The signal tower remained dark. The fortress falls in silence. Fighting inside the walls lasted minutes. not hours. A controlled storm. Mongols poured through the gate, each unit knowing precisely where to move. Archers suppressed the walls. Lancers drove defenders back from the tower stairs. Light cavalry dismounted to push into narrow corridors. The warrior and his ander descended toward the gate as the last clashes dimmed. When they entered the courtyard, the battle was almost over. Guards lay scattered, prisoners knelt with hands bound, supplies were already being catalogued. A lesson in efficiency. This was not merely victory, it was demonstration of mobility, coordination, and relentless discipline. The commander walked among the captured soldiers. "You fought with loyalty," he said quietly. "You will live because of it." Mercy once again served the empire. A brief moment of stillness. Night settled over the conquered fort. The fires burned low. Horses breathed steadily in their makeshift enclosures. The young warrior sat on the battlements, gazing out at the dark expanse beyond. The land was vast, but he understood now how an army like theirs could move through it, as though nothing could resist them. His ander joined him, leaning back against the stone. "Tomorrow, the ander said, this place will be behind us." The warrior nodded, and in the quiet he felt a truth forming. This was not conquest for its own sake. It was preparation, a single step in a campaign that was only a beginning. Far ahead lay larger cities, thicker walls, fiercer enemies, but they would face each in turn as they had faced everything, with the unity of riders who rode with one breath. Through the gates of foreign kings, the fortress fell silent long before dawn. By the time a pale line appeared on the horizon, the Mongols had already reorganized, redistributed supplies, and prepared to move. The captured garrison huddled in the courtyard, watched by riders who spoke softly, but carried bows, strung and ready. The young warrior tightened the saddle strap on his mare. His hands moved with practiced calm, no haste, no tremor, only the focused rhythm of a man becoming accustomed to the machinery of conquest. The fortress behind him still smelled of smoke and trampled dust. Yet as he mounted, he felt no attachment to the place. It was merely a hinge, one gate among many. Ahead lay a frontier deeper, richer, and far more dangerous. The road the enemy believed safe, a framing. Truth opens this next sequence. Kingdoms fell not because they were weak, but because they believed distance and walls would keep danger away. The Hidden Valley route scouts discovered a road winding eastward through a valley rarely used except by seasonal herders. It bypassed main garrisons. It concealed riders from distant watchtowers. It led directly toward the heartland of the kingdom the Mongols were now entering. For any other army, this path would be too narrow, too unpredictable. But Mongols thrived where rigid armies faltered. The young warrior rode at the center of the column, watching the valley walls rise like great slabs of shadow, signs of a prosperous kingdom. As the army advanced, the land changed. Small farms appeared, fields of millet, patches of barley fruit trees bending under the weight of late harvest. Stone outbuildings dotted the hills. Smoke curled from chimneys of distant villages. The warrior had grown up in a world where survival depended on motion, not rooted houses. Seeing such permanence stirred a strange sensation in him, wonder mixed with something quieter, almost mournful. The commanders take measure. The officers observed everything: quality of roads, density of farms, structure of irrigation channels. Such details mattered. A wealthy kingdom could support large armies. Large armies required deeper strategy. The Mongols calculated without writing a mental map, evolving with every mile. The village that heard the wind before the hooves. By mid-morning, smoke rose from a cluster of wooden homes at the base of a ridge. Not the smoke of battle, the ordinary smoke of cooking fires. A decision made in silence. The Mongols could have bypassed the village, but villages were threads in a larger cloth. Messengers rested there, food was stored there, rumors spread there. The commander raised a hand, the column slowed. "We approach with restraint," he said. "Take nothing without reason." A declaration that mattered. Conquest needed order more than it needed plunder. The approach. The villagers spotted the riders long before they arrived. Children were pulled indoors, doors shut, dogs barked with rising panic. But the Mongols entered quietly, no torches, no shouting, no loosing of arrows. The warrior felt dozens of fearful eyes watching from doorways and window slits. A message delivered. The commander dismounted in the center of the village square and addressed the oldest man he could find. "We seek information," he said. "Give it, and your people will be left unharmed." The elder, trembling yet steady in voice, explained what he knew. The nearest walled city lay 3 days east. Its garrison was strong. Traders there spoke of unrest, shortages, and fear of nomad raids. This was useful. Famine and fear weakened walls long before arrows reached them. Mongol courtesy. As they left, the commander placed a small pouch of dried meat in the elder's hands. "For your people," he said. The act stunned the villagers. They had expected brutality. Instead, they saw discipline. It was a reminder Mongol rule could be harsh, but Mongol armies valued the goodwill of those who did not resist. The young warrior watched the exchange and felt the subtle weight of empire-building war could destroy, but it could also persuade. The city of narrow gates. 2 days later, the plains widened again, and the city appeared. First sight of stone. It rose from the landscape like an anchored ship. High walls of sun-baked brick parapets lined with watchman banners, flapping stiffly in the mountain wind. Narrow gates reinforced with iron. Guard towers spaced regularly. A moat fed by a diverted river. For a warrior raised under open sky, the sight was both imposing and strange, a world that tried to shut itself against the world outside. A medieval puzzle. The commanders halted the column at a safe distance. This fortress city was not large, but its defenses were carefully constructed. Assaulting it head-on would waste time and men neither acceptable. What made the Mongols formidable was not brute force, but the refusal to fight battles that others expected. Find the points where the city breathes, the commander instructed. Every city must. That was the guiding principle of Mongol siegecraft. The anatomy of a city scouts moved out in all directions. 2 climbed the low foothills to observe from above. Others circled the outer farms disguised as travelers. By evening, fragments of information returned like pieces of a carved puzzle. Weak points, discovered one. A drainage tunnel beneath the western wall, too small for horses, but perhaps large enough for a man. 2 merchants from the city complained of grain shortages, meaning the city might not endure a long siege. 3, a gate ritual took place at dawn and dusk. Guards rotated predictably, lowering vigilance during the transition. This last detail mattered most. Everything created by men, the commander said quietly, has a rhythm. Break the rhythm and the creation fails. The warrior learns to see cities as maps. Sitting on a rise overlooking the walls, the young warrior realized that cities were not unassailable fortresses. They were living things, breathing through their gates, feeding through their markets, aging through their shortages, weakening through their routines. His upbringing had taught him to read storms, herds, and rivers. Now he learned to read stone. The night of silent hooves. The Mongols did not wait. They never waited. At the first sign of moonrise, the column divided again, smaller units slipping into the dark like ink, thinning across parchment. The young warrior was assigned to a group of 20 riders, not to storm a gate, but to sever the living arteries of the city. The cutting of roads. They dismantled small wooden bridges. They blocked narrow paths by felling trees. They scattered caltrops across roads used by messengers. Not to stop speed was always the Mongols' advantage. Denial of speed was their second. The waiting. The unit encamped in a hollow far enough from the walls to remain unseen. Torches were forbidden. Fires were shallow, shielded by stones. The warrior ate a few bites of dried meat and lay back listening to distant city sounds, dogs barking, iron-shod boots on stone, voices muffled by walls. He wondered what the people inside would think. if they knew an army rested just beyond the reach of their torches? Do they feel safe, he wondered? Does the city believe its gate can hold back the sky? These were questions without answers, yet they carried the quiet melancholy of a world where borders meant everything and nothing. The plan: draws, breath. Just before dawn, the commander gathered the 20 riders around him. The city opens its western gate at sunrise, he said. Merchants go out, guards relax. A moment only, but a moment is enough. Are we entering? Someone asked. The commander shook his head. No, we break their sense of order. Panic is the first breach of a wall. He outlined a tactic simple in form, yet devastating in effect. Strike the gate patrol with precision, scatter civilians, disrupt the guard rotation, then vanish. This was not a siege. This was psychological warfare, the beginning of erosion from within. The young warrior prepared his bow, understanding that the task ahead required restraint, swiftness, and discipline. The sun had not yet risen, but the day already carried the weight of coming upheaval. The gate of morning confusion. As the first band of light appeared, the gates began to open. A handful of merchants stepped out carrying baskets. Guards stretched inattentive after the long night. That was the moment. The strike 20 Mongol riders charged from behind a low ridge, hooves muffled by sand silhouettes cutting across the rising sun. Arrows struck shields and spears before the guards fully grasped they were under attack. Merchants scattered across the road. Shouts filled the morning air. A horn sounded too late. The young warrior fired one arrow at a guard reaching for the alarm drum. The arrow struck the drum instead, splintering the wood and deadening the sound. The ander hit another guard near the gate hinge, crippling the mechanism. The gate froze, half open, half closed, symbol of a city caught between safety and exposure. The vanishing. Before the defenders rallied, the Mongols had already turned their mounts. They vanished down the valley path, leaving confusion, not carnage. Behind them, the city exploded into alarm, captains shouting bells, clanging garrisons rushing to walls. But the riders were already miles away, returning to the commander with the knowledge they had succeeded. Disorder had begun. Fear had entered the city before any siege engine arrived, and the Mongols understood: a shaken heart weakens a strong wall. The philosophy of the unseen warrior. As the sun rose higher, the young warrior rode in contemplative silence. He did not smile at the victory. It was not triumph he carried, but awareness. Awareness that wars were not won by brute strength alone. Awareness that walls cracked first in the mind. Awareness that he was part of a force shaping history, not just with battles, but with subtle disruptions. A small action multiplied by thousands of riders across a continent could topple kings. His ander rode beside him, eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "We are still at the beginning," the ander murmured. "Yes," the warrior answered. "And the beginning already feels heavy." The road stretched ahead, endless and wind-worn, a path leading toward cities larger, richer, and more formidable than this one. Yet the warrior felt a quiet steadiness in his chest. He had seen how the Mongols moved through the world, not as destroyers alone, but as students of every landscape and every weakness. And so the journey continued, not toward victory, but toward the deeper workings of a war that would redraw the map of nations. The siege that began with a whisper, the attack on the morning gate, had spread through the city like wind through dry reeds. By midday, the fortress city was no longer a place of order. Merchants argued with guards, captains barked conflicting orders, messengers were sent in every direction, even though none could travel far, for the Mongols had already severed the roads. And far beyond the sound of alarm bells, the young warrior and his unit returned quietly to the main encampment. The commanders gathered satisfied. Not because the city had been wounded, but because its confidence had. Now came the second phase. The true siege would not begin with arrows, rams, or ladders. It would begin with silence, the encirclement without visibility. A framing declaration sets the stage. The Mongols preferred sieges where the defenders had no clear sense of what was happening outside their walls. A ring of motion. The army positioned itself in a wide arc far enough to remain unseen, close enough to intercept any outgoing rider. Units rotated with precision. Water sources were controlled, paths were monitored, signals were observed. The city, unaware of the exact size or placement of the Mongol force, fell into the first stage of siege panic, imagining danger at every point. The warrior's new task. The young warrior was assigned to a reconnaissance group responsible for watching the walls at night. They lay among low shrubs, their breaths controlled their silhouettes, blending with the earth. From this distance, they could see the torches flickering atop the battlement's guards, pacing restlessly, and shadowed clusters of civilians gathering near the gates. His Ander whispered, "They're afraid of what they can't see." "And what they think they see," the warrior replied. Both were true. The breach of psychology. The Mongols did not taunt. They did not fire arrows. They did not reveal numbers. They allowed the city's imagination to work against itself. This was siegecraft not recorded in manuals but repeated across countless campaigns. The engineers of the steppe. By dawn, new teams arrived, men whose skills came not from battle but from craft. Masters of mechanics. They were engineers, carpenters, rope makers, miners. Some had been born Mongol, others had been taken from conquered nations, and now served willingly rewarded for their knowledge. The young warrior had seen many talents among the steppe people, but never such intricate expertise. These men examined the terrain where the ground sloped toward the walls, where the soil could support engines, where a watchtower blocked the approach. Here, one engineer said, pressing his palm against the earth, "We build the construction that changed war within hours, the plain filled with movement. Men cut timber from distant groves, oxen pulled heavy beams, carpenters hammered quietly, striking wood wrapped in cloth to dampen sound. Rope makers twisted long cords from animal sinew. The beginning shapes of siege engines emerged, frames of torsion-powered catapults, skeletal towers, large wooden shields mounted on wheels. The warrior watched in quiet astonishment. "This is not steppe warfare," he murmured. "No," his Ander answered. "This is empire warfare." A profound shift lay in those words. An army that learns from every culture eventually becomes stronger than all cultures combined. The hidden watchers inside the walls. By evening, something unexpected occurred. A signal from within. From the western tower of the city, a small light flickered, 3 short bursts, one long. It was not a distress call, it was a pattern the Mongols recognized, a sign used by merchant smugglers and sometimes informants seeking negotiation. The commanders studied it. "Someone inside wants to speak," one officer said, or "someone inside wants favor." When the city falls, replied another. Either way, it meant the city was fracturing internally. The warrior realized another truth of medieval conquest. Walls can stop arrows, but they cannot stop ambition, fear, or betrayal. The night meeting. Under cover of darkness, 2 trusted riders approached the walls wearing cloaks of local fabric. A rope was lowered. A document was exchanged. When the riders returned, they delivered startling news. Grain was scarce within the city. A portion of the militia had little loyalty to their governor. A side gate rarely used had been left in disrepair. This intelligence changed everything. The commanders' faces remained calm, but their eyes sharpened. The siege no longer aimed only at weakening the city. It now had a doorway. The breach that required no ladder. At dawn, the Mongols prepared for a maneuver both delicate and devastating. The Forgotten Gate. Near the city's northern side, where brush grew thick and terrain dipped sharply, a small postern gate lay crooked on its hinges. It was meant for servants' trash or emergency exit, not armies. But Mongols did not require gates built for armies, they required openings built for opportunity. The approach in fog. A thin veil of morning mist rolled across the ground. Under its cover, 20 warriors, including the young rider and his Ander, advanced quietly on foot. Their horses remained behind the ridge, silent and still. The gatekeeper, a single guard, leaned against the wall, half asleep. A swift thud of a bowstring muffled by leather dropped him before he could cry out. The warriors reached the gate and found it secured only by a wooden bar. 2 men lifted it. The gate swung inward. Beyond lay a narrow corridor, unlit and echoing faintly. The heartbeat before. Entry. The warrior listened. No shouts, no footsteps, only the distant hum of the awakening city. He breathed deeply, tasting the musty air within the corridor. This is the moment they never imagine, his Ander whispered. And the moment that changes everything, the warrior replied. Then they stepped inside. A city from the underside. The corridor opened into a storage courtyard filled with crates, broken carts and piles of old tools. The lower quarter residents of the poor district stirred vendors setting baskets on tables, children chasing chickens, smiths heating their early fires. They noticed the warriors too late, but instead of screaming, many froze. Not from courage, but from uncertainty. These were not marauders torching homes or slashing throats. They were disciplined, silent, moving with purpose. One of the older men spoke cautiously. "Are you here to kill us?" The commander leading the infiltration shook his head. "Stay inside," he said gently. "You will not be harmed," and he meant it. Mongols valued order over terror, efficiency over brutality. The climb toward the gatehouse. The warriors split into 2 groups. One moved to secure the area. The other advanced toward the inner gatehouse, where the mechanism controlling the main western gate was located. They climbed narrow stone steps, passing hung laundry and deserted alleyways. The city above bustled, unaware of the invaders slipping under its skin. The young warrior felt the strange calm of being within an enemy's walls. The scent of cooking rice drifted from a window. A woman hummed softly, unaware of the danger below. It struck him with quiet melancholy. Every conquest touches lives that never chose the conflict. The moment the city realized, it had already fallen. They reached the gatehouse. 2 guards stood inside, still arranging spears for the day's rotation. The Ander stepped forward, bow half drawn. "Lay down your weapons," he said softly. The guards hesitated, but then they saw the shadows of more Mongol warriors filling the doorway. They surrendered. Within minutes, the warriors controlled the mechanisms of the western gate. Only one action remained: the opening of the gate. When the commander's banner rose from a nearby rooftop, the warriors pushed the levers downward. The great wooden gate shuddered, then began to lift. Outside, an entire Mongol wing waited, silent, disciplined, prepared. The defenders on the outer walls turned too slowly. Their panic arrived a heartbeat late. The gate opened fully. The Mongols entered like wind through an unlatched door. The sound that ended resistance. Not a trumpet, not a battle cry. The sound that broke the city's will was the rhythmic, steady drumming of hooves on stone. Dozens, hundreds, then thousands. The defenders, caught between disorganized leadership and internal fractures, dropped their weapons almost as soon as the first riders appeared in the central square. The city had fallen without a storming ladder, without engines touching the walls, without a full battle. It had fallen because the Mongols understood its weaknesses better than the city understood itself. The law of the conquerors. By dusk, order replaced chaos, the governor's judgment. The city's governor, shaken and red-faced, was brought before the commanders. He expected immediate execution. But the commander simply said, "You will not die today, but you will serve." The governor bowed his head, trembling with relief and humiliation. Protection for the innocent civilians who had not resisted were protected. Markets were restored, food stores were inventoried, a garrison was established. The Mongols, contrary to the city's fears, did not burn homes or slaughter townsfolk. Instead, they reorganized the city to serve the empire. The young warrior watched this transformation with quiet understanding. Control built through fear collapses quickly. control built through structure endures. The warrior's private reflection. As night deepened, he found a quiet place on the city's outer wall. Below, fires burned steadily. Horses rested in the courtyards. Engineers repaired the gate. Villagers carried water under guard. His Anda approached, leaning beside him. "This is only the first city," the Anda murmured. "Yes," the warrior said, staring into the horizon. "The road ahead will be harder, and longer, and filled with more walls." The warrior breathed in the cool night air, sensing the shape of the campaigns yet to come, mountains, rivers, cities, greater than this one. He did not fear them. But he understood now that conquest was not merely a clash of armies. It was the slow, deliberate unmaking of old worlds and the quiet shaping of new ones. And he was part of that immense, unfolding tide. The march toward the mountain kingdom. The young warrior remained on the wall long after the torches burned low. Below him, the captured city moved through the rhythms of uneasy peacesmiths repairing hinges, merchants sweeping shattered pottery from the streets, Mongol guards shifting between patrols. Life was returning, though, under a new constellation of order. When dawn began to bleed across the sky, he finally descended, knowing the next command would come soon. And it did. The commanders summoned every unit leader. A new directive had arrived from the Khan himself, delivered by a rider who had crossed half the steppe to deliver a single message. The campaign would continue deeper beyond valleys, across plains, and into the highlands, where the ruling kingdom held its greatest fortress. The young warrior felt no surprise, only a tightening resolve. Conquest did not stop with one city. It unfurled like a long banner carried by the wind. The city reborn as a base of empire. A framing truth begins this movement. Every captured city became not an end, but a foundation for the next campaign. Reorganization in the aftermath. Mongol officers transformed the city with quiet efficiency. Granaries were inventoried, stables expanded, hostages from noble families taken for future leverage. Messengers dispatched across the newly secured territory. Workshops were established for arrow-making, harness repair, and bow maintenance. Engineers set up a station to build new siege tools for the terrain ahead. The city's people watched this transformation with a mixture of fear and astonishment. Where they expected fire, they found structure. Where they expected plunder, they found rules. The chosen garrison. 1,000 Mongol riders remained to hold the city. 300 local men were drafted, sworn by oath, to defend the gate under Mongol command. The warrior observed as each man placed his hand on a strip of felt and vowed to serve the new order. He saw in their eyes how necessity could bend loyalty. The departure toward higher ground. 2 days later, his unit, part of the right wing, rode out through the northern gate. The land ahead rose gradually, shifting from farmlands to hills, scattered with scrub and wildflowers. The farmers who watched them pass villages stared from terraced fields carved into the slopes. They did not run, neither did they approach. The memory of the city's fall had reached them. The warrior felt their eyes following the column, fearful, uncertain, waiting to see where the storm would travel next. The road that wound between cliffs. By midday, the path narrowed sharply between high cliffs. Echoes bounced from the stone, amplifying the sound of thousands of hooves. The commander ordered silence. Ambushes were common in such places. The warrior rode with his bow, half-lifted, scanning ridges where shadows lingered in suspicious stillness. He could not shake the sense that the land itself was watching them. The ambush of the painted gorge. The moment came late in the afternoon. A thin whistle cut the air, too sharp to be wind. Arrows. The hidden enemy warriors in leather armor burst from ledges above, shouting war cries that echoed through the gorge. They wore painted faces, blue and black streaks marking cheeks and brows, and their banners bore the emblem of the mountain kingdom. These were the ridge fighters, known for their agility and knowledge of the terrain. The first volley struck Mongol shields and saddles. Horses reared, shouts rippled through the column, but panic never took hold. the command to shift. The commander raised his arm. Instantly, the column split in both directions, riders hugging the cliff walls while archers dismounted and returned fire upward at precise angles. The young warrior chose a sheltered indentation in the rock, firing at figures darting along the ledges. His ander shouted, "Left ridge, 3 more." They moved in unison, arrows loosed rhythmically, every shot measured. The enemy's mistake. The ridge fighters fought with courage but underestimated one truth. Mongols learned quickly, even in terrain unfamiliar to them. A group of Mongol riders looped backward through the gorge entrance, climbing a side path scouts had discovered earlier. They emerged behind the enemy's position, firing downward in a sudden coordinated burst. The ridge fighters faltered. Their advantage evaporated. The end of the ambush retreat cries echoed through the cliffs. The remaining fighters vanished into cracks and crevices, leaving the gorge littered with splintered arrows and fallen bodies. The warrior exhaled, shoulders tense from the intensity of the exchange. His mare stamped the ground, still alert but uninjured. Lessons carved in stone. As the column advanced, again slower now, the commanders shared a truth every warrior understood, but few voiced. An enemy who fights for home strikes hardest. The young warrior considered this. The ridge fighters had not defended a city or wealth or supplies. They fought for land, for ancestry, for the memory of those who carved terraces on impossible slopes, and he felt a quiet respect for them. War, he realized, was not always a clash between right and wrong, but often between two worlds that shaped their people differently. The fortress in the clouds. 2 days later, the land rose sharply into a plateau. Before them, perched atop a vast escarpment, stood the mountain kingdom's greatest fortress, a citadel hewn from the earth. Its walls were carved from living stone. Its towers were square and thick. The approach path wound upward in tight curves, easily defended. Banner after banner snapped in the cold wind. Watchtowers bristled with archers. Bronze shields glinted under the high sun. Unlike the earlier city, this fortress had prepared itself. It expected the Mongols. The warrior feels the weight of impending trial. The young warrior stared upward, feeling awe rather than fear. This was a test worthy of the reputation the Mongols carried across continents. This was a challenge requiring every lesson he had learned, from childhood rides to coordinated hunts to battles in valleys and infiltrations through unguarded gates. He sensed that this siege would be unlike any before, and that he was about to witness the full extent of Mongol ingenuity. The council on the windy ridge. The officers gathered on a ridge overlooking the fortress. The wind tore at their cloaks, carrying dust and cold. The mapping of a mountain stronghold. The engineers stepped forward first. They studied the angles, measured slopes, identified blind spots in tower views. One pointed to a narrow outcrop. Here, a platform can be built for engines. Another pointed to the cliff's base. There is an old mining tunnel. Perhaps abandoned, perhaps useful. A third pointed to a bend in the road. Ambushers could position here, but so could we. The commander's decision. He stood quietly, absorbing every detail, then said, "We will not rush this siege. We observe first. We learn the fortress as if it were part of our own bones." This was the Mongol way speed in the field, patience before a wall. Nightfall at the base of the escarpment. As night descended, the army made camp in the long shadow of the cliff. The warrior sat beside a small fire, sharpening his arrows, slowly listening to the wind howling through mountain cracks. His ander approached, carrying a water skin. "We've faced walls before," the ander said. "Yes," the warrior replied, "but not walls made by mountains." A quiet silence settled between them. Then the ander murmured a thought that felt both heavy and true. "This siege will change us. Perhaps even more than victory will." The warrior looked up at the dark outline of the stone citadel. Above them, torches flickered like stars pinned to the fortress walls. He did not know how they would breach that stronghold, but he knew the Mongols always found a way. The siege. Above the clouds, night wrapped itself around the escarpment like a shroud. Torches flickered high up on the fortress walls, blinking in and out as the wind gusted across the cliffs. Below, thousands of Mongol riders lay in patient silence, their fires dim, their horses blanketed and still. The young warrior sat beside his mare, polishing the curve of his bow, listening to the mountain breathe. The air here had its own voice, thin, sharp, restless, moving through crags and ravines with a whisper that felt almost alive. His ander lay beside him, staring upward at the fortress silhouette carved into the night sky. That wall, the ander murmured, was built to stop generations. Then it will need to learn to move aside, the warrior replied softly. But even as he spoke, he wondered what form the next days would take. Wars on open plains were storms, sieges in mountains were long winters. Both demanded endurance, but of different kinds. Somewhere in that dark citadel, soldiers prepared. Commanders studied. Families huddled in fear. A world was bracing for impact. And the Mongols were reading that world with quiet precision. The fortress of endurance. Of framing. Truth guides the opening. Great walls do not merely defend territory, they reveal the character of those who built them. The anatomy of a natural fortress. The mountain fortress was not a simple structure. It wrapped around the cliff's peak like a crown of stone. 3 rings of walls rose one above the other. Watchtowers jutted like carved teeth. A long ascent path wound in steep spirals, exposed to archers at every turn. The Mongols had never encountered a position quite like it. The first days of study. Instead of attacking, the commanders watched. Engineers returned with sketches made in dust. Hunters brought tales of narrow goat paths that cut through the cliffs. Local villagers whispered of old mine shafts and dry aqueduct channels beneath the walls. Every detail mattered. The warrior joined scouting groups that climbed low ridges to observe movement inside the fortress. At dawn, a plume of white smoke rose from a distant gate. At noon, supply carts moved between inner and outer rings. At sunset, shadows revealed where guards doubled their lines. To most, it looked like routine life. To the Mongols, it was a living blueprint. The failed parley. 3 mornings into the siege, the mountain kingdom attempted diplomacy. The envoys at the gate. 2 envoys descended the winding road under a banner of truce robes heavy with embroidery, expressions stern and tired. The Mongol commander rode forward with 3 officers, including an interpreter. The envoys demanded that the Mongol army withdraw, that peace be restored, that tribute cease. Their tone was proud, rigid, anchored in a belief that high walls placed them beyond danger. The commander listened without expression. When they finished, he offered the same terms he had given every city on the march: surrender your fortress, swear loyalty to the great Khan, your people will be protected, your lands will be governed with fairness, refuse and your fortress will fall regardless. The envoys exchanged cold glances. High walls bred confidence, sometimes falsely. They returned without agreeing. The doors close. As they climbed the road back to the fortress, the young warrior watched their silhouettes against the sky. Do they believe stone will save them? He asked quietly. Stone helps, his ander replied, but only until hunger arrives. The doors shut behind the envoys with a sound that echoed down the escarpment like the closing of fate, the engines that touched the sky. On the 4th day, the siege truly began. The rise of the great tower. The engineers revealed their work, a siege tower taller than any the Mongols had built, before a skeletal giant of timber and hide, reinforced with rawhide, soaked and dried for strength. It was anchored to a rolling base, fitted with hooks, ladders, and a shielded platform. It could move slowly up the winding road, protected from arrows by layered hides and wet felt. The warrior had seen siege towers before, but never one that seemed built to challenge a mountain itself. Will it climb? He asked. It will, an engineer said confidently. And the walls above will feel its breath. Stone breakers and fire lobbers, catapults, were assembled next torsion engines made from twisted sinew, thick beams and carved arms. They hurled stones at the outer walls not to break them immediately, but to fracture sections, weaken joints and unsettle the defenders. Fire pots filled with oil arched through the air at night, splashing flames across parapets and rooftops. But the mountain walls absorbed much of the impact. The fortress did not fall. Yet the Mongols did not falter. A siege like winter required patience. The descent into the mines. On the seventh night, a group of miners captured months earlier from another kingdom reported something extraordinary. The old tunnel. Near the cliff's base lay the sealed entrance to an abandoned silver mine. Local folklore claimed the tunnels ran beneath part of the fortress. The commanders ordered immediate excavation. The young warrior and his anda were assigned to protect the miners as they worked in darkness. The earth below their feet. In the tunnel, the warrior felt the mountain press around him like a living presence. Miners dug carefully, listening for hollow spaces. They placed wooden supports, lit small lamps, and whispered to one another as though disturbing a sleeping spirit. Hours passed. Then a muffled sound air, a cavity beyond the rock. The miners signaled. Picks struck the final layer. A space opened, a forgotten storage chamber, inside the walls of the fortress. The breach that came from beneath. The discovery shifted the entire siege, the chamber of dust and silence. The chamber was small, dusty, filled with broken crates and spiderwebs, but it led to a narrow corridor barely wide enough for one man, a hidden passage forgotten by those who lived above. The commanders chose a silent infiltration. 20 warriors, including the young rider and his anda, prepared to enter the passage at midnight. The narrow climb, bent low, they climbed the cramped corridor, lanterns hooded to keep the light dim. The air was stale, their footsteps echoed faintly. At bends, they paused to listen, ears straining for any sign of movement. Finally, they reached a grating. Beyond it lay the lower internal courtyard of the fortress. Just a few yards away stood a guard who seemed half asleep. This was the moment. The anda raised his bow, loosed an arrow without sound, and the guard slumped silently. The warriors lifted the grating and entered the fortress like shadows moving against stone. The fall of the middle gate. The city had 3 rings of defense. They now stood inside the first. The sudden strike. They moved through the lower terraces, past storage sheds, animal pens, and narrow alleys illuminated by dim torchlight. 2 more guards were subdued. When they reached the middle gatehouse, they found the control levers, unguarded proof that the defenders believed the outer walls would protect them. Within minutes, the inner defenders heard a sound that froze their blood. The grinding groan of the middle gate lifting. They rushed toward it, but too late. Mongol riders surged in from below, descending the outer road just as the gate rose. A perfect coordinated breach. Chaos in the stone rings. The defenders screamed orders. Arrows flew wildly. Drums thundered. Women and children fled toward the citadel. But Mongol momentum had already entered the second ring. The young warrior assisted in clearing the gatehouse, moving with trained calm. His arrows found marks with unerring precision, not driven by frenzy, but by survival and discipline. He never lost sight of his anda, a silent pact formed years ago on the steppe, binding them through dust and death. The last hold of the mountain king. Only the inner citadel remained. A fortress within a fortress. A towering structure carved into the living rock, its gates thick with iron, its courtyard narrow, its defenders desperate. Inside, the king and his household gathered, a mix of armored nobles, weary soldiers, and frightened attendants. The Mongols did not rush. They positioned archers. They brought forward the great tower. They readied the miners for a new task. The warrior sensed the final stage approaching. Not a bloody storming, but an inevitable surrender. The negotiation. Without pride. Before the first engine launched, the citadel gate opened. The mountain king emerged wearing armor of beaten bronze, his face drawn but resolute. Behind him, elders and ministers carried folded banners. "We cannot withstand you," the king said, "but I ask that my people be spared." The commander listened. "Your people will live," he answered, "and you will maintain your title under the Khan's authority." The king bowed his head in bitter relief. The citadel surrendered at sunrise, the quiet after the storm. As the Mongols entered the citadel, the warrior felt neither triumph nor elation, only a deep, steady realization of what this victory meant. The mountain kingdom, proud, ancient, rooted in stone, had fallen not to brute force, but to patience, observation, and the smallest crack in a forgotten tunnel. His Anda stood beside him, eyes on the horizon. "We climb mountains," the Anda murmured, "and then the world places new ones ahead." "Yes," the warrior replied quietly, "and we climb those too." The wind swept through the high passes, carrying dust and relief, and the faint echoes of a fortress that would resist no more. What lay ahead was unknown kingdoms, richer armies, larger lands, stranger than anything he had yet seen. But the warrior felt ready. The steppe had made him. The campaigns had shaped him. The mountain had tested him. And the road, endless, demanding, unstoppable, awaited. The road that divides loyalties. The mountain wind softened after the fortress fell. For the first time in many days, the air carried warmth rather than cold defiance. Smoke from Mongol cookfires drifted upward, mingling with the fading embers of the citadel's own hearths. The young warrior stood on a terrace overlooking the high valley below. From this height the world seemed vast, layered in ridges and distant plains, as though inviting him onward. But the commanders did not speak of rest. Their eyes were fixed on the map, carved by the land itself. Beyond the mountain kingdom lay a region fractured by rival clans, river fortresses, and roaming war bands. A place rich in trade routes, yet unstable enough that no single king had ever held it for long. This land was the next stage of the Khan's campaign, a crossroads where loyalty was bought, broken, shifted, and contested, where a warrior's oath meant everything and sometimes nothing. And it was into that uncertain territory the army now turned its gaze. The reorganization of victors. A framing. Truth begins this chapter. The Mongol army advanced only after securing every rearward foothold with meticulous order. A city-turned administration engineers documented the mountain fortress's supplies. Scribes, many taken from other nations, recorded the names of households and craftsmen. A Mongol garrison remained to guard the passes. Local nobles swore allegiance, some with sincerity, others with trembling reluctance. The king, once proud on his stone throne, now bowed to a new center of power. The warrior watched as the citadel transformed, not with destruction, but with reorientation, as though the stone halls themselves were adjusting to new voices, new orders, new rhythms. The division of forces. The Khan's distant message dictated the next move. The central wing would advance along the lowland trade road. The left wing would travel through deep forest valleys. The right wing, his wing, would descend the mountains toward the river plains. 3 vectors of pressure. 3 paths encircling the next theater of war. The warrior sensed the growing scale of the campaign. Each conquest was not isolated. Each was a thread woven into an immense expanding pattern. The descent into the riverlands. 2 days after securing the citadel, his unit began the long descent, the trail of stones and water. The path wound sharply downward past cliffs streaked with mineral deposits. Waterfalls cascaded from unseen heights, misting the riders as they passed. Bridges of woven rope swayed beneath hooves, creaking ominously. The warrior's mare stepped carefully but confidently, accustomed to the strange terrain. As they moved lower, vegetation changed. Pines gave way to birch and willow. The air thickened with the scent of damp earth. Villages between riverbanks. Along the riverbanks they saw huts of reed and timber. Fishermen pulled nets laden with silver-scaled fish. Women washed clothes on flat stones. Children paused in their play to watch the column pass. These people had lived between warring clans for generations. Fear had become instinct, caution a way of breathing. The Mongols did not harm them. They took no food beyond necessity and left small gifts in return, a practice the warrior had seen before. It cultivated something more valuable than fear. It cultivated memory, the lands of shifting allegiances. By late afternoon, they entered a long valley dotted with banners, each representing a clan with its own rivalries and histories. A region without a single ruler. This was not a kingdom. It was a mosaic of loyalties shaped by marriage, blood feuds, ancestral claims, and seasonal migrations. One village offered greetings, another closed its gates. A third sent a small group with gifts of dried fruit, hoping to avoid attention. The warrior sensed a strange tension here. People feared any army, not just the Mongols. Long-standing rivalries had exhausted them. The wise command. The commander ordered restraint. No unnecessary conflict, he said. Strike only if struck. This was unusual for many medieval armies, but the Mongols prized speed and information. War against every clan would bog them down. A diplomatic encounter. At dusk, representatives of 3 clans arrived with offerings, grain meat and lacquered bows. They sought assurance. One elder asked, "Do you come as conquerors or as travelers?" The commander replied with quiet honesty, "We pass. Those who stand against us will fall. Those who allow passage will be under our protection." The elders bowed deeply, relieved, uncertain, but practical. A people long caught between feuding powers knew how to read the winds of strength. The ambassadors of the river fort. 2 mornings later, the Mongols reached a river fortress guarded by one of the region's most influential clans. A fort without hostility. Unlike the mountain citadel, this fort did not bristle with tense archers. Instead, 2 ambassadors approached their armor, polished their expressions steady. They presented the commander with a wooden staff engraved with symbols of their clan. "This is our sign of goodwill," the elder ambassador said. "Our clan seeks alliance. We know the others will seek your favor as well." It was not submission. It was negotiation. The Mongol response. The commander accepted the staff and replied, "We offer stability. Your loyalty will determine your reward." These words carried enormous weight. The ambassadors understood. In this region, loyalty could shift like water in a river. But allying with the Mongols offered something the clans had never known, a force powerful enough to quell local feuds. The warrior watched carefully. This alliance was not forged by fear. It was forged by opportunity. The march into rumor's shadow. Beyond the river fort, the valley widened into plains thick with reeds and rolling hills. Stories from the road. Travelers whispered news of a rising warlord ahead, a chieftain known for iron-willed discipline, commanding riders who fought with unusual unity. He ruled no kingdom but controlled enough land to be dangerous. Some said he was preparing an army to meet the Mongols. Others said he sought alliance. All said he was ruthless. "He will test us," the commander stated simply. The warrior's inner shift. Hearing these rumors, the young warrior felt something stir. This next enemy sounded different, not sheltered by walls, not protected by high mountains. A rider, a leader of riders, a mirror perhaps of Mongol strength or its reflection darkened by ambition. The warrior wondered what kind of man could unite disparate clans in this fractured land, and what would happen when 2 visions of command collided. The first signs of an approaching force. By evening, the plains grew unnervingly quiet. Birds flew low in scattered patterns. Reed beds rustled without wind. Tracks in the mud showed the passage of many horses, fresh, deliberate, organized. The commander dismounted, kneeling to inspect a hoofprint. "Large mounts," he murmured. "Heavy riders, disciplined spacing." The warrior felt his pulse tighten. These were not random riders. They followed formation, a rare skill outside the steppe, a silent vigil. The Mongols made camp on a low rise, torches shielded horses tied close. The air carried the faint scent of smoke, not theirs. His Anda whispered, "They are near." "Yes," the warrior replied. "The question is whether they come to fight or to speak." Neither knew the answer. But both sensed that the days ahead would shape more than the campaign. They would shape the warrior's understanding of loyalty strategy and the fragile line between kinship and conflict. The wind shifted. A distant horn sounded low, deliberate, controlled. Not an alarm, a signal. Someone out there wanted to be seen or feared, and the Mongols prepared to meet them. The rider who refused the steppe. The horn's distant call echoed once, then faded into the reeds. The Mongols listened in absolute stillness. No one moved, no one spoke. The young warrior felt the tension of approaching presence, the kind that travels on the air, before horses are visible, before dust rises, before blades are drawn. The commander lowered his hand. "Hold formation," he said quietly. Every rider tightened reins, adjusted stirrups, readied bows. In the half-light of dawn, shadows lengthened across the plain. Then shapes emerged, first as silhouettes against the horizon, then as riders in full gallop. But they did not charge. They slowed. They formed a line. They waited. This was not an ambush. It was an arrival. The warlord of the reed plains. A framing. Truth opens the final act. Some leaders are born of lineage. Others are carved by necessity. The unexpected envoy. The frontmost rider dismounted halfway between the two forces. He carried no shield, no bow, no spear. Only a wooden staff marked with swirling patterns of clan heritage. He raised it high, signaling peace. The Mongol commander rode forward with 3 officers. The warrior and his Anda followed a short distance behind bows, lowered but ready. The meeting between two kinds of power. The envoy spoke with a calm voice shaped by long responsibility. "My master Targutai of the Reed Plains has come to speak." "Targutai commands the riders we have tracked," the commander replied. "He commands more than riders," the envoy said. "He commands a land weary of chaos. He seeks neither submission nor defiance, only clarity." The Mongols exchanged glances. This was a warlord who understood diplomacy, not only force. The arrival of Targutai. A lone rider broke away from the opposing line, approaching at an easy pace. His armor was patched, but clean. His horse was powerful, trained, alert. His face bore weathered lines, not of age, but of decisions made under strain. When he dismounted before the Mongol commander, he bowed not deeply, but with unmistakable respect. "You cross my plains," he said, "and I stand before you because no clan here wishes endless war." The commander nodded. "You seek alliance," he said. "I seek something greater," Targutai answered. "I seek to know whether the strength of the great Khan is wisdom or merely force wearing the mask of destiny." The warrior listened with renewed attention. This was not a man easily intimidated, and such men often shape the fate of entire regions. The test without arrows. What followed was not battle, but evaluation. A challenge of understanding. Targutai asked questions no local lord had dared voice. How do you rule lands you do not share home with? How do you promise order without suffocating those who lived here long before your banners? What becomes of our customs when your law replaces them? The commander answered each with the balanced logic of Mongol governance. We punish corruption, not identity. We demand loyalty, not erasure. We govern with structure, not suffocation. We reward those who preserve peace. Targutai studied him carefully. Finally, he asked the question that mattered most. "If I bend my knee, will my people bend their backs?" The commander replied softly. "No, only those who resist without cause will be burdened. Those who serve will be honored. This is the will of the Khan." A long silence passed between them. Then Targutai drew a knife, not to attack, but to cut a strip of cloth from his own sleeve. He placed it at the commander's feet. "I will test your promise," he said, "and in return you will test mine." He raised his staff. His riders lowered their weapons in unified gesture. The alliance had begun. The warrior faces a mirror. As the two forces merged camp for the night, the young warrior found himself observing Targutai's riders with curiosity. They were disciplined, resourceful, alert. They cared for their horses with the same attentiveness as Mongols. Their bows curved similarly. Their tactics, though distinct, echoed patterns of the steppe. His Anda approached. "They remind me of us," the Anda murmured. "Or what we might have been," the warrior replied, "if the Khan had not united our clans." This realization struck him deeply, that somewhere out there, parallel lives unfolded warriors shaped by land and wind loyalty and hardship, yet who had never sworn to the same destiny. He felt a quiet respect for these riders from the reed plains, and a subtle melancholy for the truth that in another world they might have been brothers. The march toward the Great Junction. The next days brought movement, swift, coordinated, deliberate. Two armies moving as one. Targutai's riders joined the Mongols not as subjects but as partners. They mapped hidden ford points on the rivers. They shared knowledge of clan boundaries and seasonal migration routes. Their scouts moved like shadows, slipping through marsh and grass with uncanny ease. The Mongols reciprocated, teaching discipline of formation, demonstrating long-range communication with flags and horns, sharing strategies for encirclement and feigned retreat. The young warrior saw how the two forces learned from one another, not as conqueror and conquered, but as equals, shaped in different worlds. The gathering of rivals' word spread quickly. Rival clans once hostile to Targutai now faced an impossible choice. Join this growing coalition, remain neutral and risk encirclement, or resist and be crushed. Some came willingly, some came reluctantly, but they came. A region fractured for generations now began to unify under pressure, not from fear, but from the sudden appearance of a stable order. The warrior sensed this was how empires grew, not by destroying everything they touched, but by altering the gravity of tribes and kingdoms, drawing them into orbit. The night of the shared fire. One evening, campfires of Mongols and river riders burned side by side. Men exchanged stories of home. Horses drank from the same river. Children from a nearby village watched in awe, whispering that they had never seen so many clans gathered without bloodshed. The warrior sat with his Anda and Targutai himself. They shared fermented mare's milk and a dish of stewed fish from the local marshlands. Targutai spoke with quiet reflection. "You Mongols know loyalty," he said. "But loyalty sometimes blinds men to what lies beyond their orders," the commander replied gently. "Orders carry us, but understanding shapes us." The warrior considered these words. He realized he was hearing the essence of leadership from two very different worlds, one forged on the endless steppe, the other carved in river valleys and marshlands. And both worlds were meeting at this fragile hinge in time, the crossroads where fate divides. Days later, the united army reached a point the locals called the Great Junction, a vast plain where 4 trade routes met, each flowing toward a different kingdom. Here decisions would alter the future of countless peoples. The command that charted a continent. A Mongol messenger arrived dust-covered, exhausted, bearing a new directive from the Khan: advance south. Secure the trade routes, bring stability to the river clans, do not destroy what can be governed. This was more than a military order. It was a blueprint for reshaping the region. Targutai's decision. At night, Targutai called the warrior and his Anda to his tent. "I will follow the Khan," he said simply, "but if his promise breaks, so will our alliance." The warrior sensed the weight of those words, not a threat, but a vow sealed by the pride of a man who refused to protect his people with anything less than clarity. The warrior's final reflection. When dawn broke over the Great Junction, the warrior stood alone on a gentle slope overlooking the merging of armies. He thought of the cold steppe of his childhood, the city that fell without a torch being lit, the mountain fortress that resisted then surrendered, the clans fractured by old feuds, and the riders who now stood beside them not as foes but as brothers. He realized the truth of conquest. It was not merely the taking of land, but the shaping of lives, the weaving of new patterns, the settling of ancient storms, the quiet bending of chaos into structure. His mare nudged him gently. His Anda approached with a half smile. "The road continues," the Anda said. "It always does," the warrior replied. He mounted, feeling the familiar strength of the saddle beneath him. Ahead, the united columns began to move, Mongols, reed riders, river clans, a new force, traveling toward lands unknown. He did not know what future campaigns would bring. He only knew he would ride them with steady breath, loyal purpose, and eyes shaped by all he had witnessed. And as the sun rose over the shifting plains, the wind carried forward the sound of countless hooves, a sound that would echo across kingdoms, rivers, mountains, and memory. The saga of the Mongol warrior continued, woven into the vast tapestry of a world that never stopped changing.